morning. I'm Carla Hayden, the Librarian of Congress, and I hope you all have been enjoying yourselves this morning. Now, we have a rather large crowd this morning for this particular session. And that's why I'm very thrilled to introduce our next program. For the past year at the Library of Congress, you may sit down, because I have a few more things I'm going to say. For the past year at the Library of Congress, we have been celebrating change makers. And I can think of few people who more than aptly fit that description than the United States Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Okay, I'm gonna hurry up. She is a hero and an inspiration to so many of us. In fact, at 4 a.m. this morning, students from American University, who are right over there, camped out in front of this facility, and they are here. She says, and I said, Justice, we're going to talk about your graduation from Columbia Law School and taught at Rutgers and Columbia and spent most of your career advocating on women's rights and all of these things. And you've been called recently the Beyonce of jurisprudence. And the justice, I said, could I say that? She said, I'd rather you say the J-Lo. So, without further ado, she is joined by her co-authors of her best-selling memoir, My Own Words. Co-authors Mary Hartnett, adjunct professor at Georgetown Law, Wendy W. Williams, a professor emerita at Georgetown Law, and her interviewer today, and the interviewer, the person you know very well from NPR, Miss Nina Totenberg. So, the notorious RBG.
Please be seated. No, this one? Okay. Good.
And I have to tell you, before I leave the stage, I want to shake her hand.
Well, I want to give her a hug, but that would be very unprofessional. So this is quite an amazing group, and I'm very admiring of all the people who have been online for so many hours and waiting to see the justice. There's a lot to see, even though she's a pretty little person. So, how about J-Lo? How did that happen?
I was called about a month or so ago by Jennifer Lopez, and she said she would like to meet me and introduce her fiance, Alex Rodriguez. So they came to Chambers, and we had a very nice visit. She mostly wanted to ask if I had any secret about a happy marriage. But now A-Rod is traveling with her to concerts all over the world.
So, what was your secret to a happy marriage? Did you pass on your mother-in-law's secret?
On the day I was married, my mother-in-law, I was married in her home. she took me aside and said she wanted to tell me what was the secret of a happy marriage. And I said, I'd be glad to hear. What is it? And she responded, it helps sometimes to be a little deaf. And that good advice I have followed in every workplace, including the good job I now have. So if an unkind word or thoughtless word is said, you just tune out.
I would personally advise that instead of Chairman Mao, you listen to Justice Ruth. Justice Ginsburg, we all know you've had some health challenges in the last year, the last month. You had radiation for most of August. So let me ask you the question that everyone here wants to ask, which is, how are you feeling? Why are you here instead of resting up for the term? And are you planning on staying in your current job?
How am I feeling? Well, first, this audience can see that I am alive. And I am on my way to being very well.
And why are you here instead of resting up for the term?
The term, we have more than a month yet to go. So I will be prepared when the time comes.
So how do you just keep trucking?
For one thing, I love my job. It's the best and the hardest job that I have ever had. And it has kept me going through 4 cancer bouts. Instead of concentrating on my aches and pains, I just know that I have to read this set of briefs, go over the draft opinion, and so I have to somehow surmount whatever is going on in my body and concentrate on the court's work.
So your book, In My Own Words, it's the first, essentially, of 2 by Mary Hartnett and Wendy Williams, and you in the first one, because it has a lot of your own words from the time you were in grammar school and writing for the school paper and opinion pieces and to your Supreme Court opinions. And then there's going to be a later authorized biography. These 2 ladies have been working on it for some time. So Mary Hartnett, let me turn to you for a moment and ask you about the upcoming book. I hesitate to ask this, but I'm going to do it because at least I have 4,000 witnesses. When?
Can I just say preliminarily that My Own Words was to be second. My official biographers, Mary and Wendy, have been at work how many years?
15 years.
15 years.
2004.
And the idea is the book would come out, the biography would come out, and it would be followed by selections from speeches I've given, opinions I've written. But the years were going on, and then it came to me that Mary and Wendy expected that I would be on the court for some time into the future. So to make the book complete, they wanted to wait. And I said, okay, let's flip the order. Let's have my selected writings first, and then the biography.
And it was a marvelous idea.
So You still haven't said when.
So
That is my job, to
It
ask
is.
questions, you know.
this justice keeps doing things, and we're very happy about that. And so it will be, the idea originally was that it would break the story of Justice Ginsburg. It was before she was notorious, but now it will be the complete, full story. And so we want to wait until we have that, and hopefully it will not come out very soon.
Well done, Mary.
I talked to you a little bit about the upcoming book. You won't tell me much, but I do know that there's a whole chapter about Justice Antonin Scalia, Justice Ginsburg's great friend, sparring partner, and entertainer in some ways. So tell me why there is a whole chapter about him and about your interview of him.
Sure. So there's also a whole chapter of him, about him in my own words, including Justice Ginsburg's reminiscences about Justice Scalia. And everyone, I think, in this room knows about the unlikely friendship between the two. And interviewing Justice Scalia was a real treat for the book. And we interviewed him for the biography, but parts of that interview are in my own words. And as Justice Scalia and Justice Ginsburg are so different in so many ways, going into his chambers is very different. Justice Ginsburg's chambers are light, airy, modern art, dozens or hundreds of pictures of friends, family, colleagues. And going into Justice Scalia's chamber, it's dark, leathery. There's a big dead animal looking down from you from the wall. And so as I sat there interviewing Justice Scalia, I watched how he went from the kind of tough jurist that we all know, and his face just softened and lightened up as he talked about his good friend, Ruth. And he told several stories. One was when they traveled to India together, and they went to visit the Taj Mahal. And Justice Scalia described how he watched Justice Ginsburg listen to the tour guide describe the love story behind the building of the Taj Mahal. And he said he saw tears start to stream from her eyes. And as he told me that, I'm 98% sure I saw a tear not related to an opinion or a dissent come out of Justice Scalia's eyes. And the other story that he liked to talk about was parasailing. Justice Ginsburg, when she was a young 70-year-old, was in Nice for a legal exchange and was standing in the hotel looking out at the water and saw all these people parasailing. And she turned to her husband, Marty, and said, "Marty, that looks like fun. We should do that." Marty looked horrified and said, "Are you crazy? And if you do that, I'll remember you to our grandchildren." The dean, who was the host, said, "I'll go parasailing with you." This was Dean Yellen. And his wife was equally horrified. And she said, "If there's an accident and they can only save one of you, it better not be you." But so they went parasailing. They had to adjust for weight because Dean Yellen was a normal-sized human being, and there was Justice Ginsburg. And off they went up and down, plopped into the water. And Wendy and I asked Justice Ginsburg about this experience a few years ago when we were interviewing her, and said, "What was it like? Did you like it?" And Justice Ginsburg said, "It was marvelous, glorious." And then she related it, of course, to a Greek myth and said, "It was like Icarus, but we didn't get too close to the sun."
The weight was also a problem in Rajasthan when we took a ride on a very elegant elephant. There was a photograph of it. My feminist friends asked, "Why are you sitting in the back of the elephant?" And I explained it had to do with the distribution.
Right.
Justice Ginsburg, you've always been a rather determined person. When you were in law school, your husband was diagnosed with testicular cancer. Doctors told you his chances of survival were extremely slim. But the two of you just carried on, and as we all know, he survived. But I thought people here might be interested in what your days and nights were like in that year, and how in some ways it set up your sleep patterns for life.
It was my second year in law school, Marty's third year. And there was massive surgery, followed by massive radiation. There was no chemotherapy in those days. We just took each day as it came. My routine was I would attend my classes. I had note takers in all of Marty's classes. I would then go to Mass General, the hospital where he was, in the afternoon. And then when he was released from the hospital and was having daily radiation, he was first very sick, and then he would sleep until about midnight, when whatever food he ingested that day, he would have. Mine, not very good cooking. But, and then about 2 o'clock in the morning, he was also dictating his senior paper to me. He went back to bed about 2 in the morning, and that's when I hit the books myself. And in between, there was our then 2.5-year-old daughter. So for weeks, for many weeks, I was sleeping maybe 2 hours a night. And that's how I became a night person. I appreciated that in those early morning hours, the telephone didn't ring. There were no emails in those days. It was a quiet time. I could concentrate on the books.
Well, I hope you're getting more than 2 hours these days. I do know that if you want to call the Ginsburg residence, you do not, on a day, like a weekend day, you do not call before noon.
But that's not true on sitting days.
Not true. It's not true on court days at all. So today, women, to some extent, take for granted their equality in the workplace. But that was not the case when you were a young lawyer. You couldn't get a job in a law firm. You had not one, but 2 strikes against you. You were...
Well, I was first a Jew, and there were many
3 strikes.
long well-known firms in New York that were not yet up to welcoming Jews. The next, I was a woman. That was a higher barrier. But the absolute killer was I had a 4-year-old daughter when I graduated from law school.
You were a mother.
So if they would take a chance on a woman, a mother was more than they were willing to risk.
So you had top grades at Harvard, and in your last year of law school, when you moved to New York with your husband, you were tied for first place at Columbia Law School, and you're applying for clerkships. And tell us how you finally did get a clerkship, because nobody, by and large, would even interview you for the most part.
Yes, those were pre-Title VII days. So employers were upfront about saying women are not welcome at this workplace, or we had a lady lawyer once and she was dreadful. So how many men have you had that didn't work out? But I had a wonderful professor at Columbia Law School who later moved to Stanford, Jerry Gunther. He was in charge of getting clerkships for Columbia students, and he called every federal judge in the Second Circuit, in the Eastern Districts of New York, and he was not meeting with success. So he called a Columbia graduate, Judge Edmund Palmieri, who was a Columbia undergraduate, Columbia Law School graduate, and always took his clerks from Columbia. And he said, I strongly recommend that you engage Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And Palmieri's response was, I've had women law clerks, I know they're okay, but she's a mother, and sometimes we have to work on weekends, even on a Sunday. So Professor Gunther said, give her a chance, and if she doesn't work out, a young man in her class who's going to a downtown firm will jump in and take over. So that was the carrot. There was also a stick. And the stick was, if you don't give her a chance, I will never recommend another Columbia graduate as your law clerk. That's the way it was in not so ancient days for women. The big hurdle was to get that first job. Once a woman got the job, she did it at least as well as the men. So the second job was not the same obstacle. There's a wonderful book. This is a meeting about books, so let me mention it. It's called First, and it's a biography of Sandra Day O'Connor. She was very high in her class at Stanford Law School, but no law firm would hire her. She was asked, do you type? And maybe there would be a place as a legal secretary. So what did she do? She went to a county attorney and said, I will work for you without pay for 4 months. And then if you think I'm worth it, you can put me on the payroll. That's how Sandra Day O'Connor got her first job.
But even after your clerkship, you couldn't get a job in a law firm. You ended up being a law professor.
No, I could have gotten a job. In fact, I was going to a firm when another professor from Columbia, Hans Smith, said, how would you like to write a book about the Swedish judicial system? Well,
this is a part of her life you will not hear generally discussed, so you're in on a question that normally doesn't come up.
well,
How is your Swedish, by the way?
Inte så bra. But anyway, this was an irresistible offer because here I was in my 20s. Before I turned 30, I would have a book between hardcovers. Marty and I married the same month I graduated from Cornell. So I had never lived on my own. I went from a college dormitory to being married, and I had what might be called the 8-year itch. I wanted to see if I could manage on my own. And the deal was I would go to Sweden. My daughter, Jane, would be taken care of by her father for about 6 weeks. And when she finished school, she came and joined me in Sweden. And I got that out of my system. I never again yearned to live on my own. Oh, and then there was the opportunity to learn about a culture and to learn a language that I knew nothing at all about.
So you, Wendy, one of you, did you go to Sweden with her? Mary, she went back to Sweden this year.
This year.
It was the 50th anniversary of my honorary degree from the University of Lund.
And you saw there, what did you see on the streets? Your picture.
Yes.
There were posters up and down the streets of one of the many, many events that the Justice did in Sweden. She was very overprogrammed, sort of 3 or 4 events a day, but she wasn't daunted. But we kept trying to see the poster as the car was zooming through the streets, and it was like that scene in the movie French Kiss, where they never see the Eiffel Tower. We kept looking and looking, and finally driving to the airport, remember, we turned and there it was.
Yeah.
Wendy, you've been working on this book for 15 years with Mary. Did you interview all of the justices she served with? How often did you interview her? What do you do when you have 15 plus years? What is your agenda?
Wendy, before you answer, let me tell you how all this began. So,
You're not going to get to talk.
Wendy and Mary came to see me, and they said, inevitably people are going to write about your life, so why don't you make as your official biographers people you really trust? And I certainly trusted. Wendy and I were in the trenches in the 70s when, for the first time in history, it became possible for courts to accept that the Equal Protection Clause meant that women were people equal in stature to men. So I knew Wendy's strategy and mine were pretty much the same. I knew that she understood what we were trying to accomplish. So I said yes without hesitation.
In fact, when we came to her to talk about it, she sat us down at a little table, and on the table there was a stack of documents and opinions and other things about this high. And she said, oh, here's a little something that you might want to look at. That's how we knew we were in, so to speak.
So did you, in fact, interview all of the justices she's served with?
I did not interview any of the justices she served with, but Mary did.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, did the two, so between the two of you, you interviewed them all?
We did.
Yeah,
We
actually
did.
not all of them, but
Some refused to be interviewed.
well, and there are some newer additions who we still plan to interview, but most of them.
And how often did you sit down with her for an extended interview? I'm assuming it's a lot.
Well, it's a lot. We started out in that little moment in time after she was done with her summer and just before she had to knuckle down and prepare for the coming term. And every year in August, most often in the last week, we sit down with her for 3 days in a row in the late afternoon. So we have our own big stack from that. And this year it was a little different. We went up to New York where she was getting her radiation treatment, and it was amazing. How could she? Anyway, so we sat with her twice up there, and she remembered everything. She was perfectly normal, except she was very tired, which she has never let stop her, and she wasn't letting it stop her then. And that was a new experience for us in New York. But then we came back down for one day before yesterday, and did our third day. So every year we do that. And then we do a lot of things in between to keep track of her.
So let me just say this to you two here in front of God and everybody. Justice Brennan famously had an authorized biographer who got writer's block after he died. And somebody else eventually had to take over the project.
Yes. And I'm getting old. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying to you, you better not get writer's block. We all want to see that. Everybody here, some of whom are a great deal younger than me, want to be able to read the product of your labors.
Well, we do too. So,
The deal.
You know, I'm taking for granted, this is a very educated and curious audience. I'm taking for granted that everybody in this room has seen RBG at least once, and on the basis of sex. So I'm not going to go through all of the cases and the strategy and all of that of Justice Ginsburg, because there are other places where you've seen this, but there are also a lot of young people in this audience, men and women. And I wanted to ask Justice Ginsburg, in light of that, and in light of all of the conversation that we have these days about balance between work and family life, to tell us the story of the elevator thief.
Oh. The elevator thief was my lively son. It was when he was in the 6th grade. I called him lively. His teachers called him hyperactive. And I would get calls about once every month to come down to the school to talk about my son's latest escapade. But one day, I was sitting in my office at Columbia Law School. The phone rang. It was the headmaster. "We need to see you immediately." Now, I've been particularly weary that day because I had stayed up all night writing a brief. So I said, "This child has 2 parents. Please alternate calls, and it's his father's turn." So they called Marty, who was then the head of the tax department at a large law firm. He came down and was told, "Your son stole the elevator." And Marty's immediate response was, "He stole the elevator? How far could he take it?" So I don't know if it was Marty's sense of humor. By the way, the theft was one of those old-fashioned handheld elevators. The operator went out for a smoke. One of James's classmates challenged him to take the kindergarten class up to the top floor.
which he did.
So after that episode, the calls came barely once a semester. There was no quick change in my son's behavior, but the school was much more reluctant to take a father away from his work than a mother. So the suggestion to alternate calls did the trick.
So I want to.
Let me just add that son is today a fine human, and
He's not in prison anywhere.
and he's a great parent to two girls.
And because she won't do it, I will. He runs a thing called Cedilla Records, Cedille, and they produce magnificent classical recordings. Okay, that would be inappropriate for you to do, but not me. So let's talk about your time on the Supreme Court. You're appointed by President Clinton, and within 3 years of getting to the Supreme Court, you're still a very junior justice. You're assigned to write the Virginia Military Institute case, striking down their policy of exclusion of women. And you would not have gotten that assignment but for your female colleague, Justice O'Connor, right?
Yes. The seniority is very big in our workplace. So Justice O'Connor would have been way ahead of me as a chosen opinion writer. But Sandra said Ruth should write this opinion. So it's thanks to Justice O'Connor that I got to write the decision in the Virginia Military Institute case.
So you wrote in that case that most women, indeed most men, would probably not want to meet the demands, the rigorous demands of VMI. But those extraordinary individuals who can meet those demands and want to meet those demands should be permitted to. So you were invited to VMI a little over a year ago, I think, to give a speech. How did that go?
In fact, they had invited me to come to VMI at the 20th anniversary of the decision. My calendar was too crowded, so it turned out to be the 21st anniversary. And you were with me for that. The change in that school has been enormous. The commanding officer was so proud of his women cadets. They live in the same Spartan quarters that the men live in. But they were so enthusiastic. Many of them were in the engineering program. One wanted to be an atomic scientist. For the school, by admitting women, they were able to upgrade their applicant pool considerably.
Wendy, what did she leave out?
Well, she left out a Ginsburg-Scalia moment to begin with, because Justice Scalia found her opinion fairly outrageous, and he was very upset about the whole thing. And his last sentence of his opinion said something like, this is going to destroy VMI. He used the word destroy. And I asked Justice Ginsburg about that later, and she said to me with this was not so long after the opinion, I think. She said to me with the utmost confidence, VMI will be a better place if there are women, and it won't be destroyed. And the wonderful thing about that was when we were there for the 21st anniversary, people there were so proud and excited to have you in person come there after you had transfigured the place, that there was an audience almost as big as this. And back there were, what do you call them?
Sort of bleachers.
Bleachers,
Yeah.
bleachers. And all the cadets were there in their uniforms. Yeah. And for Ruth Ginsburg, they all stood up and applauded. It was just remarkable.
And as it turned out, Justice Scalia was the sole dissenter in the VMI case. The then Chief Justice Rehnquist, didn't join my opinion, but he did join the judgment. Justice Thomas was recused because his son attended VMI.
He couldn't participate.
So that left Scalia all alone. Justice Scalia knew I felt deeply about the case, as he did the other way. And he came into my chambers one day, threw down a sheaf of papers, and said, "Ruth, this is the penultimate draft of my dissent in the VMI case. I'm not yet ready to circulate to the court." But the clock was ticking, and he wanted to give me as much time as he could to answer his rather strident dissent.
You were going to the Second Circuit meeting that week.
Yes, I was going to the Judicial Conference in Lake George. I was on the plane, opened up his dissent. It absolutely ruined my weekend. But I was certainly glad to have the extra time to respond.
So, talking about VMI reminds me that when you get to the court, Justice O'Connor, of course, was the first woman justice. She's there. She's been there for quite a while.
12 years.
By herself. And as you would later learn, that's no fun because you got to be the only one for a while, too. And, you know, she was a Reagan appointee. She was a girl of the West. You were a Clinton appointee. You were from New York City. And I wondered, and you very quickly, though, established a very special bond.
She was as close as I came to having a big sister. When I came on board, she gave me some advice, not too much. She didn't want to douse me with excessive information, just what I needed to know to navigate those first few weeks. And then she was an enormous help in my first cancer bout. Justice O'Connor had a mastectomy and was on the bench 9 days after her surgery. So she was going to tell me how to manage this. She said, you schedule chemotherapy for a Friday. That way you can get over it during the weekend and be back in court on Monday. And she also said you're going to get, in those days there were not yet emails, but you're going to get calls, you're going to get letters from all over. Don't even try to respond. Just concentrate on getting the court's work done.
I'm not telling any secrets here when I say that in many of the court's biggest cases of late, you are, not all, but you are in the minority on the dissenting side. But, you know, in the last 5 years or more, you have pulled out some unexpected victories. And I'm thinking, for instance, of the court's 2015 decision upholding Arizona's redistricting commissions. These were created by state referenda by the voters to limit partisanship in the drawing of legislative districts in the state. And will you tell the audience what your opinion said?
What the opinion said?
The opinion said. You upheld them. Why?
Because something needs to be done about the partisan gerrymander. And I think California was in the lead. Then Arizona, the good voters of Arizona were tired of drawing district lines when there was very little incentive to vote because your district had been rigged. It was going to be a Republican seat or a Democratic seat. So your vote didn't count. That's not the way a democracy should run. So Arizona and California had the idea, and this was not done by their state legislatures. State legislatures would not willingly give up the monopoly they had on redistricting. So the good people of the state said, this should be done, the redistricting should be done by an independent commission, not by partisan members of the legislature.
So
it presented a constitutional question because the Constitution says redistricting will be done by the legislature thereof. So some of my colleagues said legislature means legislature, and it doesn't mean the people. To me, it seemed quite clear that the state had made the people the legislature for this purpose. States that have referenda do that. They give the deciding voice to the people, to we the people, and not the partisan members of the legislature. And I think that after that case, other states were encouraged, other states that had referenda.
So the dissent in that case was written by Chief Justice Roberts, and he argued very vigorously that the legislature means only the legislature. Now, fast forward to this year. A 5-4 conservative majority ruled essentially that the voters have no ability to challenge extreme partisan gerrymanders in court. But at the same time, the opinion written, this time majority opinion written by the Chief Justice, seemed to suggest that other remedies, like independent redistricting commissions, provide alternative ways to address the problem of partisanship in redistricting. So, could you please explain what's going on here? Have the court's conservatives changed their minds about redistricting? Is this just window dressing, or what?
As one lives, one learns. So I think the chief learned that he was wrong in the arrogance.
So I want you to look at this crowd. They tell me this is 4,000 people. I'm not quite sure. Next week, you and I are going to another interview in Little Rock, Arkansas, in a venue that holds 18,000 people. And not only are all the tickets gone, there's a waiting list of 16,000 people. So my dear notorious RBG, how does it feel to be a cultural and pop icon in your 80s?
It's amazing that at the advanced age of 86, everyone wants to take a picture with me. The notorious RBG was started by a second-year student at New York University Law School. She was dismayed about the decision the court had recently rendered in the Shelby County case that held the key provision of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 unconstitutional. Then she thought to herself, I'm angry about that, but anger will not get me any place. So I'm going to do something positive. The positive thing that she did was she put on the internet in a Tumblr the announcement I made from the bench of my dissenting opinion in the Shelby County case. And she called it the notorious RBG because she had in mind a well-known rapper, the notorious B.I.G. And people asked me, what in the world do you have in common with the notorious B.I.G.? And I said, it's evident. That we were both born and bred in Brooklyn, New York.
By the way, when you and Justice O'Connor were on the court, even at the end of her tenure, some very seasoned Supreme Court advocates, not newbies, really seasoned people, kept confusing you. And they would call you Justice O'Connor and her Justice Ginsburg, and excuse me, you don't look anything alike. She had at least 6 inches on you. Her hairstyle was different. Her accent was different. Everything was different. Why?
Well, for 12 years, Sandra Day O'Connor was the lone woman on the Supreme Court. And advocates were accustomed to there being a woman on the court Her name was Sandra Day O'Connor. So if they heard a woman's voice, it had to be Justice O'Connor. But she would sometimes say, I'm Justice O'Connor. She's Justice Ginsburg. That happened not to just occasional lawyers who showed up, but even the Solicitor General was mortified as soon as he called me Justice O'Connor and realized the mistake that he had made.
He said wished that there was a trap door under his feet.
But nowadays, we are 1/3 of the bench. And we're all over the bench. Because of my seniority, I sit next to the chief with Justice Sotomayor on one side and Justice Kagan on the other. People who have attended argument at the court know that my two sisters-in-law are not shrinking violets. They're very active in the colloquy that goes on. In fact, I think for some years there was a rivalry between Justice Scalia and Justice Sotomayor, who could ask the most questions.
And sometimes she won.
So it seems to me appropriate, since we began this interview talking about Justice Scalia, we should end it in some ways there, because the two of you were such pals for so many decades and that was such an unlikely friendship to people from the outside. Why were you? What did you love about him so much?
He was a very funny man. We had been buddies on the D.C. Circuit for some years before he was appointed to the Supreme Court. And that was a 3-judge bench. Sometimes he would whisper something to me that was so funny. I had everything I could do to contain myself from bursting out into hysterical laughter. And in the Supreme Court, when we didn't sit next to each other, he would sometimes send me notes. I can't repeat this audience what some of them were, but and there's a comic opera called Scalia Ginsburg that characterizes the two of us, the different way we approach reading a legal text, but our reverence for the court as an institution and for our Constitution. So to give you just a small sample of this very amusing opera, Scalia's opening aria is a rage aria. It's very Handelian in style, and it goes like this. The justices are blind. How can they possibly spout this? The Constitution says absolutely nothing about this. And then I answer him, Dear Justice Scalia, you are searching for bright line solutions to problems that don't have easy answers. But the great thing about our Constitution is that, like our society, it can evolve. So the plot is roughly based on the magic flute. Justice Scalia is locked up in a dark room. He is being punished for excessive dissenting. And I enter the dark room through a glass ceiling. And say I'm there to help him pass the tests he needs to pass to get out of the dark room. And a character called the commentatore said, why would you want to help him? He's your enemy. And I explained, he's not my enemy. He's my dear friend. And then we sing a wonderful duet. It goes like this. We are different, we are one. Different in our approach to legal texts, but one in our reverence for the institution we serve and for the United States Constitution.
So I know this seems like a very short time, but we have already exceeded it. And I thank the Justice, her biographers, all the people here who waited so long to come. This has been a lovely morning. Thank you, Justice Ginsburg.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. Please be seated. Thank you. Thank you. I think we should do that.
Okay. Exit stage right.
Thank you. Thank you very much.